I was the only Prime Minister who allowed fracking. Sadly, I wasn't in office long enough to actually make it happen. We want Elon and his nerd army of muskrats examining the British deep state. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's fantastic to be back in America. And it's fantastic to be back at CPAC for the second year in a row. But last year, there was a dark cloud hanging over this conference. It was called Joe Biden. And this year, we are now under the leadership of President Donald Trump. This is truly the golden age of America. But I'm sad to report that Britain is in the dark age. We have a socialist government, commissars ruling over us, who are leading our country in a terrible direction. But what I want to say today is they are not the only problem. The current establishment stooges in Whitehall and Westminster are only the latest iteration of Britain going wrong for the past few decades. Because let's be honest, Britain isn't working. The British system is deeply rotten. Britain is becoming a failed state. We've got people who are being arrested and locked up for posting on X and Facebook. We've seen tens of thousands of girls as young as 12 raped, tortured, and even killed by Pakistani grooming gangs. And yet many of those perpetrators have not been brought to justice. In fact, those crimes have been covered up, and we know that the authorities colluded. We know there was police collusion, and we know there was collusion from the local council. We have a massive problem with illegal immigration, but yet we can't even deport people who are criminals from our country because of human rights. One example was an immigrant from the Democratic Republic of Congo who had sexually abused his own stepdaughter. But he was allowed to stay in Britain on the basis of the right to family life. How disgusting. A criminal from Albania was allowed to stay in Britain because his son didn't like the kind of chicken nuggets they sell abroad, and I'm not joking you there. But it's not just a problem we have with mass migration and illegal immigration. We've also got a problem with our energy in Britain. So in Britain, fracking has been banned. I was the only Prime Minister who allowed fracking. Sadly, I wasn't in office long enough to actually make it happen. We have net zero policies that have decimated our oil and gas industry. The net result is we have the highest energy prices in the developed world. And in Britain, we've just seen the last steel plant close down last year. We cannot produce our own steel anymore. We have an economic orthodoxy, a Bank of England, that has printed vast amounts of money. They've created rampant inflation. They've wasted billions of taxpayer pounds. If they weren't the government, it would be called a heist. Yet in none of these cases, have any of these people, any of these authorities been held to account for the fact they have completely failed. And we're in a situation where Britain is almost bankrupt, morally, socially, and economically. And I think people in this room might want to know, how on earth has this happened? This is the country that invented parliamentary democracy. It's the country of the Magna Carta. It's the country of the Bill of Rights. We protected freedom of the press back in 1695, almost 100 years before the First Amendment. How on earth can the country of Adam Smith and the Industrial Revolution be deindustrializing? It doesn't make any sense. And the answer is that everything that made Britain great is being destroyed by an establishment that hates Britain and hates the West. Like in most of Europe, our universities, our institutions, and our corporations have been taken over by anti-West ideology. Islamism, green extremism, anti-capitalism, wokery, transgenderism, you name it, they've adopted it. And what we've seen is a massive failure of leaders in Europe to push back against this, because this is not something the population wanted. This is not something the people in Britain or Europe voted for. This is something that was imposed from above. And what happened is that democratically elected politicians handed vast amounts of power over to the unelected and the unaccountable. In Britain, Tony Blair in particular trashed centuries of liberty by creating a tyranny of technocrats. He created an unaccountable Supreme Court, which had never been existed in Britain before. He created a much deeper and powerful state that is not held to account. He also handed vast powers over to an alphabet soup of international bodies, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, the ECHR, all of whom nobody could vote in and nobody could vote out. And all of those bodies, as you've seen in the United States of America, have been captured by the same anti-West ideology. But what I find really incredible, really incredible, is it wasn't just China and Iran and Russia that were funding these NGOs, funding these anti-West groups. It was actually the United States of America under President Joe Biden through USAID. Now, did you know that American taxpayer dollars was funding the BBC? Did you know that they were funding the Tony Blair Institute? Did you know that they were funding Rory Stewart's wife? It's incredible. We thought you were our friends, but you were actually, American taxpayers were funding this anti-West ideology. And the problem is, when the people in Britain voted for something different, when they tried to change the government, when they tried to change the system in 2016, in 2019, and in 2024, they found the same people were still in power. The bureaucracy had not changed. And it's no surprise that young people are losing their faith in democracy because they don't believe it can change things. And amazingly, during all of this, many so-called conservatives went along with the ideology. They were busy hugging Greta Thunberg. They were putting up taxes. I'm not joking about that. They were putting up taxes. They were increasing immigration. They were pursuing transgender ideology. And it's no wonder that the Conservative Party had its worst defeat since 1834. Patriotic Brits have had enough. They've had enough. And we look across the Atlantic with envy. We see President Trump in the Oval Office signing off executive orders, and we want some of that in Britain. We want drill, baby, drill. We want men banned from women's bathrooms and women's sports. We want illegal immigrants deported. We want taxes to be cut. We want a Trump revolution in Britain. We want to flood the zone. We want Elon and his nerd army of muskrats examining the British deep state. Ladies and gentlemen, we missed the first American Revolution in 1776. In fact, it was actually a revolution against us. But we want to be part of the Second American Revolution. We want to dismantle the British deep state, which is older and more entrenched than the American one. We need a great restoration bill to repeal all of the terrible Blair laws, the Equality Act, the Climate Change Act, the Human Rights Act, the Constitutional Reform Act. We need to eradicate judicial activism in Britain and restore parliamentary sovereignty. We want our government run by the executive, not by the bureaucracy. But most of all, what we need is we need to restore free speech. This is the lifeblood of our democracy. And J.D. Vance is right. Vice President Vance is right. Free speech is in retreat in Britain and in Europe. To Europe's governments, particularly Britain, they see George Orwell's 1984 as an instruction manual. Look at the evidence. A British citizen was arrested for praying outside an abortion clinic. We have German prosecutors saying that if you insult somebody, you could be arrested. We had Alison Pearson, a British journalist, visited at her home by the police because of a tweet that she'd posted a year ago and since deleted. I want the police to be policing real crimes, not thought crimes. But not only this, we have a supine legacy media that pay lip service to free speech, but have suppressed stories and distorted stories. The BBC were found to have violated their editorial guidelines 1,500 times in the 4 months after the appalling atrocities of October the 7th. They were found to have been downplaying Hamas terrorism and promoting the idea that Israel was the aggressor. This is our state broadcaster, funded by the taxpayer. The mainstream media have failed to report on the grooming scandal, and they've failed to hold the deep state to account. And much of the reason for that is the deep state are the people giving them all their information, all their leaks, all their funding, all of their material. And they're frightened of the media regulator, Ofcom. We have seen what independent media has done for the United States, and we want some of that. That's why we are going to be establishing a new free speech media network in conjunction with our American allies, including the great people here at CPAC. It will be uncensorable and uncancelable. It will take on the Britain-bashing corporation, which is what we call the BBC. It will take on Starmer and his socialists, and it will take on the censors of Germany. Because it's only by telling people the truth, in the United Kingdom, in Europe, in the Anglosphere, in America, that we will turn our backs on the war's West against itself. All of the people here are working to make America great again. I believe that we can make Britain great again. I believe that we can make Europe great again. And I believe that together we can make the West great again. Thank you. Thank you.